Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome back to Connections. We're on episode 12 today, and this is an ongoing series where we have been exploring trauma healing, somatic work, and Islam, and beyond. We're kind of an eclectic couple here, so we've been exploring different themes in relation to those things, and alhamdulillah, I'm joined today again by my dear friend Sheikh Idris. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Idris.
Assalamu
Alhamdulillah. So we realized at some point that we had missed one of the vital components of the nafs, of the self, which was intellect, aql. So we were exploring the nafs and the qalb, the heart, and the ruh, which we call spirit, and the aql, I guess maybe we, for better or
yeah, we touched on it incredibly briefly. I think we spoke about it when we were speaking about the heart.
About the heart, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think
really
we wanted
flesh
to
out this.
Flesh it out, yeah. So, just in preparation for today, I was just thinking, and I wanted to keep it simple because the intellect can be something really complex in the way that we.
Yeah, you wanted to keep it simple. That's not where I'm going with this.
Well, just to begin. Just to begin to frame it, because honestly, I'm with you. There is complex. It's very complex, and I think it's a very, it's enmeshed with so many different things that we probably need more than an hour even to really capture the basics, the outline or the silhouette of the complexity. But just to frame it, because when I was thinking, what's intellect? What is intellect? Most of us conventionally think of reason, like logic. It's kind of synonymous with logic, that the person who's really intellectual is someone who speaks a certain way, carries himself in a certain way, has certain type of occupation, maybe in the academy, in the university, maybe speaks in a certain monotonous way, very cerebral and very abstract thinking. And
Mr. Spock.
Mr.
Spock.
Mr. Spunk.
It's Mr. Spock from the Star Wars. From Star Trek.
Star Trek. I'm more Star Wars, so I have no idea.
Oh, right. That's beyond. That's outside your reference point. Isn't it? The Vulcan,
Oh, the Vulcan. Yeah, okay.
That I can't even do that.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, the audience are going to have a laugh at us tonight.
That's all right. That's all right. This is why these are so special, because they're just organic, right? But there's something like we have this kind of archetype, or we have this semblance of what the person of intellect is like. And just moving with kind of the stream of consciousness of our previous explorations on nafs, qalb, ruh, that really we are an embodied reality. We have a deep connection to God, to the world, to one another through ourselves. We have this relational apparatus. We have a very deep sensory apparatus that connects us to our interoceptive, our internal feeling and external sensation processes. And all of that's connected, and then there's different faculties that come along with that. And then those different faculties and capacities kind of materialize into maybe the qalb and its features and the aql and its features and so forth. And so just wanted to frame that for people, that we're not talking about logic per se, or reason, or that left brain binary black and white type of thinking. That can maybe be kind of an capacity or an element of the aql in its vaster sense, but not by any means capturing the essence of what the intellect is. I think what you had mentioned way back when we were talking about the heart is that the aql is kind of this extension of the aql, is the extension of the heart, of the qalb in some way.
I mean, I see it as a faculty, like a faculty with it. I mean, all these are faculties, aren't they? And they all overlap. That's the thing. But I see it as like the light. If we were to imagine the heart like the lamp, that the intellect is a light of that.
Yes. And what I love about that metaphor is in some way, it's your light. It's just like, but there's a capacity for you to kind of now see it, where the heart, maybe you're not really able to see it. But with the intellect, things are known. things about you are known. There's a type of self-knowledge that you become self-aware of. There's a type of knowledge of God and intelligibles, and God taught the names of things to Adam alayhi salam, and it's this feature of intellect, of knowing. And so we have this deep sense of knowing, but there's another faculty that kind of piggybacks, if you will, or extends out of the heart, which is this aql, which is the capacity to really know, that shines light on certain things that maybe were not observed or not acknowledged previously. And so it's the light of the heart made manifest in some way. So that is kind of what I held from our previous conversation, and I'm wondering exactly what you were saying with like the sun being the heart maybe, and the moon being the intellect.
That when you say that, I see them as two different entities, which I'm my understanding so far, and as I said, we're constantly ruminating over these things, is that it's one in the same. It's a faculty that the heart uses in which to grasp things. So if we look at aql from an etymological perspective, it's to hold on to something, it's to grasp something, it's to tie it, to restrain it, bring it near. The words we've got that come from this is to bring it near, to tie something, to tether something, to ransom. So if you think about ransom, you're holding on to something because you want to get something. Or a pearl in an oyster is another word that comes from this root. So it's almost as if something's being held, and you've got onto, you're protecting it, and so it's bringing, for me, I think it's bringing something into the consciousness where you're able to actually access and work with, and so it's a cognitive quality there. That's a faculty of the heart that it uses in order to make things intelligible for it. And what you were saying, exactly what you were saying, is that traditionally in Islam, they looked at separating the intellect from reason. They're two separate things. Because intellect is understanding and discernment from the Greek or Latin, I'm assuming Greek, is intellect is understanding and discernment, whilst which we call the spiritual intellect or the universal intellect. So it's, or they call aql al-kulli. And then you've got
like the holistic intellect, like
which incorporates intuition, imagination. And
how would you differentiate those two things? So let's say intuition. I think we talked about that before as well when we talked about the nafs. It's intuitive kind of knowing, and
direct and immediate. So intuition's like an insight that's direct and immediate.
Yes.
So if we can
and imagination.
I think we really need examples here for people to be able to grasp things.
Even me.
It's very theoretical. So let's think of an example. Let's put our heads together. So an insight is something direct and immediate. So you experience it, don't you? So there's something that comes in, like you have an insight about, I don't know, your relationship. You have an insight about your studies, you have an insight about a person that you're interacting with. It feels like a direct thing. And the scholars mentioned that this kind of knowing is gifted. It's not acquired. So it's received and given. So it's almost as if it's like, oh, you don't know where that came. You didn't effort to get that. It's just something dawns. So that's what we're talking about, intuition. Whilst imagination is different, because an imagination is more of an exploration of something.
Nice. Okay.
Does that make sense?
And it can be acquired? The imaginal? Can we go into the imaginal and acquire meaning or acquire knowledge?
Yeah, well, it depends. I think that's a very good question, because I think imagination, obviously, you can imagine. If I'm imagining something, there is an element of effort there, isn't it? But I think there's an aspect of the result of that imagination is gifted. I'm imagining, and I haven't really sat down and explored that.
Well, I mean, I think everything would ultimately be gifted, of course, in some way. But we're talking about so like that fine line of like free will and agency, and acquisition and efforting between just receiving and passively imbibing and stuff like that. Okay, but maybe we can, okay. So there is a capacity of, you can't like force intuition. Maybe, but I'm wondering, is there a way, and this is maybe what gets clinically kind of becomes relevant, is there a way for us to set up conditions by which maybe we are more receptive?
Yeah, well, that's what Carl Rogers, I'm just reading because of my studies at the moment, is he speaks about a process-orientated approach rather than goal-orientated, what we've been speaking about. He says it's like a plant growing, you can provide the environment for it. But in essence, the thing happens through stages that is not controlled and efforted. So, where like with the plant, it's the soil, it's the sunlight, it's the water, but it's providing an environment. So yes, I think the more you explore your experience, the more you're in tune, or should I say, the more you're in tune with your experience on those 7 levels that we've spoken about, the sensations and the feelings and the emotions and the images and the behavior and the thoughts and the beliefs. The more we almost dwell in that, then we gain a greater capacity to be able to intuit things, because we're more in touch with ourselves and we're more in touch with our environment, whether that be physical or whether that be from a more spiritual perspective.
That's right. So it's something that we can still work towards in some way and cultivate. It's something that should be actively kind of sought. And I think that if that is to be something that we, make part of our lives as Muslims, where we do work, but we don't rely on the work to receive or to achieve. And that's kind of that really beautiful, delicate balance between, like, we talk about doing the work. Like I talk about the work, like capital W, like doing this internal work and healing and exploring the self and processing older wounds and even newer wounds and getting to know yourself and your strategies and uncoupling them and coming into agency and all of that. And in that, finding that flow and finding that connection to your internal subjectivity, your internal experience, the life force by which then we can access more connection to our hearts and our intellects, and this intuition, these gifts of God, which are not due to your efforting, but in some way it's like you don't earn Jannah, you don't earn the garden from praying, but you can't, it's very difficult to kind of make yourself eligible in some way. If you don't.
One scholar gave a really nice metaphor about you put your net into the water, and so, but you don't catch the fish. There's no element of you can choose probably better waters, but you can't, in the end, you aren't the agent of catching the fish. It's basically there's a lot of elements that need to be at play, that many of them are out of your control and even out of your awareness for you to be able to even gain your catch. And what came up for me there was when you were sharing that was that even our acts of worship, our ritual practice, becomes more of an experience rather than a doing.
Exactly.
And that's when we want to. That's when we actually we savor it. And so it's like and again, when I said we're more in tune with ourselves and we're more in tune with our environment, I think there's an added aspect that came to me when I was saying that. Well, when you were speaking, was that we also have an awareness we have a metaphysical awareness as well. And that's why it's so important to have a cosmology and to have a set of metaphysics, so that we can also see how Allah's interacting with us and how angels are interacting with us and how demons are interacting with us. So we gain a perception, not just of ourselves and the world around us, but what's going on a higher plane as well. And it becomes an exploration and an inquiry. And the more we do that, I believe we gain greater insight and direct and immediate experience of those realms as well.
Totally. I thought of a story that I shared before online as well. It's a story, I think, of Imam Abul Hassan, and I won't tell the whole story now. People can go. Actually, I put it on this channel. You can find it on the channel. But it's him when he was asked to be taught to teach someone alchemy. And ends up telling him, you pray at the masjid for 40 days, don't miss a prayer, and then I'll teach you. And at the end of the story, he ends up finding the light in the actual worship. He forgets what he actually wanted in the first place. And it's just about really coming into, the hikmah and the deep, Allah, insight really of the Imam is like being able to take someone, to journey him through that process, not shame him, not beat him over the head, just like, here, just go do this with intent and just see how this transformation will take place. And that's what happened for this person. And that's really what we all hope for in some way, for that transformation, not in doing more necessarily, or doing and then getting to a point where you cease to do, but deepening our connection to our work, where we begin to uncouple the actual effort and the actual, practice, and actually from our actual experience, and be able to really feel into the actual event of it.
Yeah. And what came up for me when you shared that was a more sort of immediate example. It's like a parent coming up to a community leader or something, or a therapist or a counselor, and saying, how do I get my children to behave? And then you saying, well, just come and spend, if you do 10 sessions with me for an exploration of your own self. And then, you're halfway through, maybe week 5, you realize, oh, my kids don't bother me as much, or they just seem to be behaving myself. It's like, that's often what we need. And what we don't need is that sort of short-term, how do I get them, control them and make them behave.
Absolutely.
Really, there's something much deeper that's going to take you much further.
I just had someone earlier today. He's really struggling with what's going on in the world. He's a grown man, good man, sincere, very intelligent in both meanings, but really struggling in being able to really show up for himself and his family and this and that. And today was our first session, but it was really, I think, in some way, inshallah, revelatory for him, just to begin to see how his internal state and his internal dynamic is in some way playing out for him, even though there are there's great upheaval and chaos out there, perhaps here in the US, especially for those maybe watching in the future. The election was last week, and so there's just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of shifting and transitioning going on. And so it was interesting for him to begin to kind of attend to his internal state. He kept telling stories, and I kept inviting him to kind of just see what's going on within. And there was, a dramatic type of just shift that happened. He started speaking slower and less hectic, and taking more pause between what he was saying. And it's really, and at the end he started saying, wow, it's like, I wonder, that's what I wanted to say, I wonder if my perceptions of this crazy world is more a reflection of my craziness and my abusive childhood than what I'm actually observing with my eyes, and as is reality today. And I said, that's a wonderful question. And maybe it's a good place to stop there. And you can sit with that until next time. That's the question. I'm not going to answer that question for you. That's your question. That's your soul's, that's your heart asking that to another part of you. And like inviting yourself. You're inviting yourself with that question. What a beautiful thing that is. Right? And there's something, I hope, inshallah ta'ala, for him and for all of us to be able to listen into our own heart's beckon, for its own transformation, its own experience of itself, and knowing of itself and knowing of Allah Ta'ala and all that. Inshallah.
Yeah, and that's important what you just shared there, because the point the scholars make that's important is that the aql will not necessarily serve you if it becomes tainted. So if your state becomes tainted, your rationale becomes tainted, or your intellect becomes. So I imagine what that means is that the more what we call the particular intellect, which is reason, logic, where we have to acquire that, logic and mathematics and so forth. All these things they're acquired, and we have to effort to achieve them. That capacity definitely becomes skewed because it's really driven by something bigger, which is the state of the heart. And so we can use our rationale to obviously cause great corruption on the earth just as much as we can bring great benefit through it, because it's a tool in the end. But it's dependent. Its usage is dependent on the state of the heart. And so I think that's a really important point that the scholars mention, is that the aql isn't pure. It can be corrupted just as the heart can be corrupted, because it's the light of the heart.
Yeah, exactly. And so if people don't have access to their hearts in some way, they're disconnected, they're fragmented in the trauma, kind of abstracted from their reality. In some way, it's not that if they were to go hide out in their intellect, that's safe and sound for them. That in some way, their disconnection from themselves, from their own selves, can actually affect the way that they intuit through their practical intellect. Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
So particular intellect.
Yeah.
So their actual juz'i. So their actual like reasoning and rational faculties. And some people will say, I'm just a rational person. Everyone else around me is so irrational. It's like, could that be? Is there another way that could be? Could it be that you have perhaps some sort of what they call now like a cognitive bias, or we can call it an emotive bias, or an emotive framing that's blocking you from really seeing what's actually going on, and you're hiding away and strategizing away with your intellect and building constructs and ideas and filters, or actually you're misusing that very thing and furthering the connection to reality. Reason should be used to engage reality, to know reality. But here you are using it to differentiate you from, or to keep you away from reality as it is. So again, another testament, another reason, pun intended, to really be able to do our work, right? Yeah. Because this is so important.
And what you just said there is that now they're discovering in neuroscience that our rationale is not in one compartment of our brain. It's actually all these things are this oversimplification, this triune brain, and this categorization. We don't have specific places, like there isn't a seat of emotion in our brain. It's all interconnected and they're all interplay with one another. And that's what, if we can see from our tradition, is that it can speak to that, in that these are all like the heart. Yeah, we say the spiritual heart we're speaking for. We're not speaking about the physical heart. Generally it's in the chest, but it expands out, and all these things are interplay with one another, and they need one another in a relationship with one another. So it's a much more holistic way of looking at it, and it's near enough impossible to compartmentalize it. When we do that, we're left with nothing, just like the TV. When we break the TV down to bits, we're not going to locate things. In the end, it's all these things that play together at one time that enable us to see what we see and hear what we hear from it.
I have a question for you. This kind of came to me. You know how in the Quran Allah Ta'ala says in multiple parts, أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَشْعُرُونَ أَفَلَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Do they not see? Do they not feel? Do they not intellectualize? Or I don't know. Are they not using their intellect? Are they not grasping things deeply? How would you organize or differentiate those? Because I think it'd be a really interesting study, perhaps, or survey of these ayat, and to see why Allah Ta'ala chooses.
Yeah.
Because if these are all connected, but if He's emphasizing basar and shu'ur, sha'air, and aql in certain ayat, just a thought.
Yeah. So, well, I think one thing that's important. I this is my own sort of studies and researching this is, and in that book I'm reading, How Emotions Are Made. She says emotions are not located in the body; they're a social construct because with all these things. So one community might see happiness represented in one way, another community might see it in others. So she said in Italy, in Roman times, they have proof that they didn't used to smile that often when they were happy. It was shown in different ways. So all this sort of that there's a seat for an emotion in the brain, and it's in correlation with certain muscular readings, Ekman's sort of stuff. They completely rip that apart now, because you just don't know how people express things in different ways. And she says that some people don't even talk about, some communities don't speak about emotions as some sort of internal going on. It's actually interaction. In Japanese culture, I think she was saying that it's actually an interaction between two people, the emotion. And we don't have a word for emotion in Arabic.
Not shu'ur? Shu'ur is not an emotion?
No, it's not shu'ur, it's perception. Like we've taken that word and we've adopted it, masha'ir, to mean feelings and emotions, but that's not the original word. When Allah says in the Quran, أَفَلَا يَشْعُرُونَ, it's like, do they not pick up with their senses? It's like, do they not sense something? And sense not meaning rationally, meaning that intuition. You know, you get a sense of something. You're using your senses to sort of pick up on something. That's what that's all about. I believe, and again, it's still a work in progress, that when we speak about emotions in Arabic, we speak about ahal and ahwal, states, like halat al-ghadab, halat al-surur. Or some say, I read in one book, was interesting, the distinction between a khatir and a warid is that a warid is more general. A warid is something that comes to you, almost comes through you and crosses you. A warid is more broader than a khatir. A warid can be an emotion. They say warid al-surur and warid al-ghadab. But a khatir is cognitive. It's, you know, there's a thought that comes. So it's more specific. So we can definitely say about shu'ur, on my belief in the reading I've done is that it's got nothing to do with emotions. And I don't think the Arabs even looked at things like that. You know, they looked at it in a slightly different way, and it'd be interesting to read that more. So to research that more about states, what's like how we in the West look at emotion and how a state could be different to that. You know.
Yeah, it's a cool exploration. Someone should do. Maybe we should do, inshallah, exploration on that. You know, I mean, yeah, I wonder how like the Jahili Arab had, when in their poetry, for example, and they're speaking about love, and there's 40 words for love, and how, if there was like a somatic, if there was a state that was distinct for each of those, you know, like ishq and khulla and hub and these things and ghadab and all of that, how, if the Arab, you know, kind of categorize those things. Like, clearly, yeah, I agree. I don't think that they're like emotional categories in the way that we think of them today. Yeah. Because how did they differentiate them?
Yeah, because that in that book, How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett, she says that emotions are a number of things. It's like you have the experience, and then society names that experience. So it's a collection of many things. It's not just, she says, this idea of like there's a seat for anger, and anger is almost absolute. She says that's she says that's being debunked basically.
Yeah, and it's reducing it. It's like making it machine like. I mean, anything that smells like that, I generally resist, and like just like almost get nauseous about it. And it's like anything that mechanizes or materializes or reduces anything from a human experience to something of like, you know, like memory being and this.
Well, these lie detectors and stuff. How do they? You could just be anxious, and you know, how do you actually know that's a lie? That's interesting.
But even then, I mean, even if that was working, that's taking a biofeedback type of impression on the whole, like a systemic type. It's not just like they're not scanning the hippocampus or whatever, you know, the memories, that this is a false memory, a true memory. They're looking at the system, biofeedback, nervous system, you know, the circulate, the heartbeat and the heart rhythm and heart rate and all. That's what they're doing. So that makes more sense to me, if anything. They're taking a broader scope of the human being to assess true and false, as opposed to just their words or imaging or whatever. But, you know, it's like, what about the Arab man who had 10 sons who never kissed them, and he was surprised as to the way the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed love. And I found that really interesting too. Maybe like there was some sort of social dynamic that was instinctual or distinctive or unique to the Arabs at that time, and the Prophet ﷺ, as part of Islam, brought this also correction, social, emotional correction, even to the way that we relate to our women, relate to our daughters, relate to our sons, showing love. Like you can see even again this kind of very beautiful and very holistic guidance that the Prophet ﷺ brought. It wasn't just this transformative and transcendental thing, but it was a transformative and immanent and human and bashari and beautiful relational thing as well.
Yeah, so coming back to what you asked, I mean, so أَفَلَا يَشْعُرُونَ, I mean, do they not intuit? Maybe it would be a potential.
For aql.
Yeah, and then يَعْقِلُونَ, do they not grasp?
Intuit meaning, you mean yash'urun?
Yeah, through their senses, they have some sense of what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah.
And then yubasirun, I'm imagining basir is a far deeper insight. It's like an insight into something that's coming from a much deeper. That basira is. I've actually done a document on this, on all these different words, the etymology and all these breakdowns.
Beautiful. Share it with me.
Yeah. But basir, I can't remember off the top of my head, but basira is obviously a deep intuition, a deep insight into things.
Which one's I don't know, this is a good question to ask, but which one's the deepest? Like what's
I'd imagine, but you're basirun.
Basira, okay.
Yeah, basira.
Okay.
I don't know. That's, yeah. But what's so interesting from a Quranic perspective is, why is that one specifically using that verse in that specific context?
Yeah.
That's an interesting exploration.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Anything else, Sidi, you wanted to cover in terms of there's a lot of pieces.
Yeah, so I think that distinction we're talking about is intellect and rationality. Is that rationality is a limited perspective. It's the limited, but there's a greater imagination. We're talking about the intellect, and that's where we really touch on imagination. And this is a bit more complex. Is that, and Charles Upton, in his book The Science of the Greater Jihad, he goes into depth about this. Is that the faculty of the imagination comes from the universal intellect. Is how we grasp things from above. And he talks about passive imagination, and passive imagination, he says, is fantasy. So you're just fantasizing about things that have they don't bring about any real change, and they don't have any real purpose. So it's just, you dreaming about things and fantasizing and glorifying things. But you're still locked up in your bedroom, and you're not bringing about any change into the world. That's how I can contextualize that.
Yeah. Look, hold on. Can I ask you? I'm going to stop you for a second. Just go back. What's the universal intellect? Maybe our listeners.
That's the qalb.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. That's the universal. So spiritual intellect. Charles Upton describes it as a spiritual intellect or the universal intellect, but it's the broader intellect where we bring in imagination and intuition, and we're not just using reason. And we need to be open vessels to that now. So we're actually receivers of something. We're not efforting. That's the danger of the rational, because the rational, we feel like we are understanding things, that we have a claim over something. And that's the danger of the rational, the aql juz'i, the partial or the particular intellect, is that you can become deluded, whilst you can't with the aql kulli. Well, I'm imagining people can still spiritually become deluded if they're, but ultimately you need to recognize that this is gifted, so that it's receiving. Now you can become deluded that I'm received this, so I must be someone special. But true intellect is where you just feel complete gratitude and awe for this. So it comes with an aspect of gratitude and awe, and some sense of undeservedness in that, you know, I haven't acquired this. Not undeservedness of like feeling rotten about yourself, but undeservedness about, you know, this is a gift from God.
It's a big gift. Yeah.
So the active, he says there's the passive imagination, where it's all in the emotions, he says, and then the will and the rational conform to the affections. So you're all just in your own vices. That's how he describes it. And then he says, then we've got an active imagination, which Jung also spoke about. And the active imagination is there's an introverted version and an extroverted version. So this gets a bit more complicated, is that the introverted active imagination is just in the psyche. So you're taking symbolism within the psyche and making sense of these things. So I saw in a dream, for example, that I was doing except this and this and this and that and this. And what does that mean for me in my life? That's an introverted exercise where you're just exercising it for yourself. It's not really taking you much higher to greater realities. So that's an introverted active imagination. And then he says there's an extroverted active imagination, which when you're really trying to draw on the imaginal realm now and take you up higher, which fundamentally is you're trying to bring about real change and see real higher meanings. And then he moves it to the highest, which he calls transcendental imagination, which you're trying to see the names of God in things. So it's seeing things on a metaphysical plane and trying to really understand what how's God speaking to you in this. So he says that's the highest. And this is where we're really connecting to this universal or spiritual intellect, because it's a real receiving, taking you up to something higher than yourself, which is into the malakut, the heavenly realm, and then the jabarut, then the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yeah, they're the aspects of the intellect that I really wanted to explore tonight and go a bit deeper into them.
Is it fair to say that our self extends into the Jabarut, potentially, because of the capacity of the aql to go into that transcendental intellection?
What do you mean by that?
I don't know. It's just, because I know that I've thought before, like we are here in dunya, we're in the material world, matter, physics, and then we're also in the spiritual world, which we can say we're in the malakut, because the ruh is of the stuff of the malakut, and so we're kind of bridging both worlds in the here and now. But I'm wondering, when you begin to perceive the names, I mean, we're getting very theoretical here, but when you perceive the names of God manifesting through the malakut, as they kind of descend through the worlds, the amr descends, the command of God, through these different names. Can you be in the Jabarut, or are you perceiving Jabarut from Malakut?
I mean, from a practical level here, I mean, what we do, like the Prophet ﷺ gave a very clear example of how we connect to the names through the creation, which is when the mother was running to the child and said, do you see this woman's mercy for her child? And he said that Allah's is greater than that. So it's transcending. It's taking a name of Allah, the Rahman, and it's seeing its manifestation in its madhar, like this vestige or this apparent manifestation of that, and then taking it further up, but experiencing that. But notice that's a very emotional. It's not just some intellectual. Like the Sahaba were touched by that experience. So the Prophet ﷺ rooted. He brought them to God in an emotional way. It wasn't some detached theoretical thing that they could like conceive. It was actually experiential.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Because honestly, when we talk about this transcendental, even for now, I caught myself. I'm like, oh, you're seeing names.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, and that's kind of, I mean, that's always kind of in my readings and my practice previously, that's always kind of been the assumption, like at a certain spiritual level. And maybe that is also the case. I don't know. But I love the way that you framed that No, it's actually just in that example, in that just in the pointing out of Allah Ta'ala's action in the world. You take the heart in a feeling way all the way up to the highest levels in the here and now.
Yeah, and I mean, Charles Upton says we have these three are always interplay with one another. Affect, which is emotion, and which traditionally would be called the impulses, but that's being used in terms of emotion, what we would call emotion today. And then we've got the rationality, and then we've got the will. So the rationality is the understanding, bringing the emotion into the cognition. Like, how do I consciously deal with this? So, because emotions sometimes outside of our rationale, our consciousness, we can have these emotions that just overwhelm us, and we can't. I mean, that's what therapy is. It's trying to make meaning out of our emotions. A lot of the work.
Yeah.
Like I feel troubled. A lot of these experiences I'm having. How on earth do I understand these? So it's almost trying to go on a journey to sort of connect those two realms, affect and rationality,
meaning.
And then the will is how to then bring it into being. The will is how now I carry it through and act, like in the behavior, in my behaviors. So we want all those three interplaying with one another. And fundamentally that experiencing God is in affect. Yes. You know, like the Prophet Sallallahu the Prophet Sallallahu was bringing that to their mind. Someone's having an emotional experience. How can I bring that into cognition and understanding? He's bringing meaning to that affective experience. And now, how can I bring that into the world now? So that in that example, compassion and mercy. How can that demonstrate into my behavior? How can I that's the ta'alluq bi asma'illah. You know, connecting with the names of Allah, is that I've experienced compassion. I've seen that woman. I've seen it demonstrated, and I felt it touch me. How do I understand that in relationship to higher realities? And then how can that then come back down and permeate my behavior so I can bring that divine quality into my life?
Yeah. So really the sunnah, the spirituality of the sunnah then really is an embodied reality. Like we're not really trying to go away from the felt sense, the basic human consciousness as it is now, but we're just trying to enhance it and expand it. As again, just for myself, even I have a tendency to do this, and maybe our listeners as well. It's like we think spirituality is this abstract thing, this novel thing. You're seeing colors and lights and names and angels, but it's really just this felt sense of connection to God in a real way.
I see many of my clients like that, though, that have had really wild experiences of seeing the Prophet ﷺ, seeing all these things, but they're really troubled because they just don't know how to make sense of these things. And a lot of the time that makes I find a lot of these people incredibly detached from themselves. But they're taught to think that this is where I should be. You know, my sense of our community, a lot of them are people who have these experiences. I think they feel like that's where I should be, completely detached. But they're deeply troubled because they can't make sense of these experiences, and they feel disconnected either from others or from themselves as well. And for me, that's not the prophetic spirituality. Now, there's no harm going up there, but you got to come back. and you got to make sense of it.
and you can't effort there. It's just it's wahbi. If the conditions are right and God takes you into some other realm of witnessing or something, alhamdulillah, that's between you and God. But that's not something that we effort to, and that's not our framework. Our framework is beauty and character. I mean, the greatest thing for us is good character and manifesting the Muhammadan qualities. That is the most spiritual thing you could do.
And there's a time to leave completely. That's when you die.
Right.
you know, and isn't it funny how, I don't know about you, but a lot of my clients are in those sort of states. They actually feel like, I'll be happy if I died. I mean, they literally say that.
I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not the time yet, love. You know?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help though too. You have teachings saying die before you die. So people are sitting there trying to die.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I believe a lot of the ways that we understand our religion, and this brings us, like, if you don't have the right state, you can interpret the religious text in any which way your state. You will interpret the text in the state you are.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If someone's a radical, they will find religious texts to support their radicalism. If someone's a complete detached person from reality, they will find hadith to support that. And so it's really important. I mean, Imam Ghazali speaks about this in the Ihya. I don't know if it was him or Zabidi mentions it in the Hashia. He says that he says that aql is like the rational, and being grounded in the observable is a prerequisite for religion. Because 100%. You know, so that you can actually interpret your religion correctly. Otherwise, if you go into religion without a grounded rational mind and a grounded state, let's contextualize that in terms of observables. You know, you've got a grounded mind that's rooted in observables. Then we can go to religion and we can see where they connect with one another. But what we often do is we have people that do the exact opposite. They go to religion and then they try to make everything conform, even if it doesn't conform to what their understanding of the religion is according to their state, which is a lot of the time completely removed from reality.
Totally. And then they say everyone else is XYZ, kafir, munafiq, zandiq, because they don't see it like I see it.
Yeah. So see how the aql can be incredibly deceptive if it's not rooted in a grounded state, like you were saying about your client, in terms of after the session he looked at things, the reality around him, very differently once his state was almost brought back to earth.
Yeah, exactly.
And as Hakim says, samawati wal ard, the heavens and the earth, you want both of those.
No, exactly.
Okay.
It's a good place to end it on, Sidi Hakim.
Yeah. There you go.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for joining us today. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And for those of you, I hope you enjoyed that conversation and have some food for thought. We'd love to hear your feedback. Again, we are exploring these things almost with new eyes. We're very open to exploring these things from our own experiences, personally, professionally, as clinicians, and our readings and our musings. And so please feel free to add to the conversation and reflections and all of that. That's almost welcome. And inshallah, tune in and looking forward to
what comes up for you, because it's an exploration and it's process orientated. This,
yes,
like we're not definitively saying things. We're coming with our insights and we're just seeing what emerges. And that's what therapy is. That is what. Let's broaden it. It's not therapy. This is what life is. It's 100%. It's living in that. It's dwelling in the here and now and seeing what emerges.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Siti.
No problem. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.